Well, welcome everyone, and especially welcome to Karen Porter, who is here to talk with us today about the Friends House Moscow.
My turn? Okay, dobro utro. It's good morning, and I'm really happy to be with you. It feels very strange that I have not visited your meeting, and that this is the first time I'm doing this electronically. So it might be a little awkward, and I told Terry earlier, I hope my two little mouthy dogs don't chime in at any point, but if they see a deer or a squirrel or something, you might hear some loud barking, and I hope that doesn't happen. Um, I am on the email lists and an informational list for San Antonio and Austin Friends, and my feeling is I'll probably land in Austin, but I'd like to visit sometime first, so you'll probably see me as soon as that's possible. I'm looking at some notes. I have things I don't want to forget. Moved to San Marcos this summer from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where I've been for 4 years. And before that, most of my adult life was in Pennsylvania. So I was in Chapel Hill Friends meeting, and before that, Birmingham Friends meeting in Pennsylvania, outside Westchester, Pennsylvania. People often ask, did I have a particular reason for becoming involved in Russia? And it didn't happen that way. I'll just put it pretty briefly. So, and I do encourage your questions as I talk, just chime in anytime. A few years ago, my son was a senior at Westtown School in Pennsylvania, which probably most of you have heard about or know about, a Quaker school. And for his senior project, he opted to go on a trip for 3 weeks to Russia with his German teacher. And we hadn't really thought about Russia much. I, as a baby boomer, have, of course, been fascinated by Russia for years, but it was sort of out of stretch. I thought, not a place I'd probably ever get to go. At any rate, he went for 3 weeks, and it influenced his college studies, which became Russian language and Russian history, Russian generally. And then when he was applying to graduate programs after college, he had a Quaker Russian professor at Oberlin College who suggested that he do an internship at Friends House Moscow while he was making up his mind where he was going to go next and what graduate program, because he had decided he wanted to study history, particularly Russian history. And it was a question of where to go. So he spent that time, a few months, at Friends House Moscow, which we had no knowledge of before. And Mom got the bright idea, oh, I'd like to go there. So I went over to visit him. I think I surprised him. But so I landed in Moscow for a visit. And when you go there, I got a business visa because I also decided to do an English language teaching program in Moscow, kind of a boot camp for teaching English to non-English speakers. And so I had a 3-month business visa. And I got to know the people at Friends House Moscow, although I had very little time for that. I was very much absorbed with the things I got involved in over there. At any rate, to make a long story short, I got involved with Friends House Moscow. And since I had just retired, that was the reason I was able to go over there. I had retired, I'd been a lawyer for almost 40 years in the Philadelphia area. And I found out that the Russians didn't want me to teach them English. The Russian people I knew wanted me to teach them American law. So I became involved over the next 6 years, spending a semester a year over in Moscow and a couple of other outlying cities, teaching American and British law to Russian lawyers. And perfect way to be involved with Friends House Moscow. Became a board member of Friends House Moscow. I was clerk for a couple of years, almost 2 years. And involved in committee work, board meetings, whatnot. So got to know Friends House Moscow and to dearly love it. It becomes a love of your life. See, what else do I want to cover? This is my first presentation in Texas and my first electronic presentation for Friends House Moscow. But one thing I did in Pennsylvania and North Carolina was travel around to different Friends meetings and make some in-person presentations to get the word out about Friends House Moscow. And it's been a wonderful experience for me. I was surprised to see that there are many more Friends meetings in Texas than I had imagined. And who knows, maybe over the next few years, I'll get to every one way or the other, but you're the first. One of the main reasons I like to do these presentations and to spread the word of Friends House Moscow is we always need more people involved. We are, as with many boards, relatively aging board, and it's hard to get people involved internationally because of the travel aspect. But to be involved in Friends House Moscow, you don't have to travel there. It's wonderful to go there. And I must say my personal experiences being in Moscow and being in the office and meeting board members in person have been priceless. But I do want to emphasize that people can get involved in a very real and significant way, whether they ever get there. And right now, in the time of COVID, we don't know when we will all get back to Moscow, some of us, if ever, because it's a difficult situation, and they're starting vaccines, but they have, as many countries, rampant COVID. My friends where I taught in particular, they let me know about what's going on over there, and it's a difficult situation. No more difficult than what we have here, of course, but we don't know when, as an international board, we will get together again. Speaking of international board, our board is made up primarily of some British, some American friends, German friends, French, trying to think, I'm probably missing a nationality, but we have people from very different parts of the world who are involved in this board. And a lot of our funding activity comes from the EU, Britain, very much so, and the German friends, and very much the United States. So, like I said, stop me if you have questions. I am now going to share a set of slides that I have. I think I'm doing this correctly. Is it up, James? Oh, wait a minute, share. Okay, does everyone see that? Okay. Actually, I have it in a PDF form, so it's on slide form. We're an independent international Quaker board. Now, some of these figures have changed. They change from day to day, but approximately 16 members from Europe, USA, and Russia. We give general direction, staff salaries, benefits. We approve projects. We work on funding. By being on the board, I'm also active with Friends House Moscow Association here in the United States. So we have a separate funding authority here in the United States. Our office right in Moscow is staffed by 2 people, Natasha and Sergey, who I couldn't give you their tenures, but they've both been the staff for several years. How many of you, if any of you, have ever been to Russia or to Moscow? Anybody? Okay. Moscow, the Kremlin in the center, it's a huge city, of course, is all clustered around downtown. And when you get on the metro, the subway, I would say Friends House Moscow it's a few stops, maybe about half a dozen stops. So it's part of the major city. It's not outside the city, but it's not right down where the Kremlin is. I think they used to be a little bit closer to Center City, but they're now a little bit more out to the east of the Kremlin. But it's a 2-person office, one big room where a lot of activities go on. They have a library in the room, all the office space, meetings occur there. When I first got involved, our board meetings were being held at the Moscow Theological Seminary, which is not far from the office. It was a Baptist seminary, where we essentially were able to use their meeting space. In fact, I had the very fun experience of staying in their dorm with a bunch of other board members, and that was just delightful. That was living with the board and being with the board from different countries, and our own staff members stayed there a night or two as well when we were there. So it was just the most wonderful kind of immersion into the experience. Although I was staying in an apartment that the law school where I was teaching provided me an apartment, I opted to stay at the seminary to be really immersed in the Friends House Moscow experience, and it was just wonderful. I wish we could do that again. We're not doing that now, but I wish we could do that again. It was fun. It was like camp, board camp. Here's a picture. I'll show you some pictures as we go. These are some people talking about, I think this is a board meeting a bit past. I can't identify when the picture was, but it's typical. I recognize a couple of people there, and we have quite a few. It's not just an international board with people from other countries, but with Russians too on the board as well. But Russians absolutely commandeer all the projects that we're involved in. That's totally domestically based. We board members provide guidance, get funding, do things like marketing presentations, but we're not the people who control the projects in any way. Two fundraising bodies. The British charity started in 1996, and then we have a US, I mentioned Friends House Moscow Association, a nonprofit here, which is a 501c3. The Russian Friends House Moscow is basically an NGO limited liability corporation. I cannot begin to describe to you the complexity of the corporate arrangement. I really can't. When I went on the board, we were going through a corporate reorganization process under Russian corporate law. And even though I was teaching law in Moscow, my familiarity with Russian law is scant. And it changes quite a bit from time to time. So any book on, I picked up books on Russian law and they're all out of date by the time I look at them. So I won't even attempt to explain this, but we are basically within Russia a limited liability corporation. And that's a loose application of our American term, actually. This is a picture of a lot of people involved. I'll just sort of scan through the pictures. They just give you a sense of who the human beings are who are participating. I'll go through some that are a little bit dated. This particular book here brings up something, as I get into projects, I'll talk more about this. One of our major activities for Friends House Moscow is translation of Quaker materials. I must say, when I first started, it's been almost 10 years ago, I didn't know the value and the absolute wonderful quality and the importance of the translation of Quaker materials. Our staff is involved in that. Again, they are Russians with great fluency in English. But we hire translators too, and there's a recent book that just came out that one of our colleagues there has written on a more comprehensive history of Quakers in Russia, and that's in the process of translation. But it's an amazing project of Friends House Moscow. It is I think one of the biggest legacies our organization will leave for Russia and for the world. Getting into some of the problems that are dealt with in Russia, and again, some of these are dated. We need some time to update the materials, but they don't change too much. TB, before COVID, Russia was experiencing tremendous problems with TB. If you ever read Mountains Beyond Mountains, Dr. Paul Farmer's book from a few years ago, he spent quite a bit of time in Russian prisons. And he's an epidemiologist, was involved in HIV and a whole host of other kinds of problems. But he was particularly involved in TB being spread in Russian prisons. And that's a big factor, as well as out in the general population. 42% of hospitals have no running hot water. Now, in the past 8 years, that figure might have gotten a little bit better, but it's a reality. One thing, when I was last in Moscow, which was about 4 or 5 years ago, I think it was about half the hospitals in Moscow were being closed down, okay? So when we say 42% not having running water, which would probably not mean Moscow. Moscow's more, would have running water. But the healthcare system there was in a time of great distress. When you think of 50% of the hospitals being closed down in the capital, which is where most things are located anyway, that was a tremendous difficulty people were running into. I had occasion, when I was there, if I needed a doctor, I had been treated for minor things, an ear infection, and I hurt my foot a couple of times. I had been treated by both an American doctor in Moscow and a Russian doctor in Moscow. So I got quite an earful as to the problems that people face. A lot of people in the United States think of Russia as the old communist Soviet Union, and maybe theoretically healthcare free for everybody, sort of like the British NHS. I don't think it's ever been like that, but it certainly hasn't been like that since the fall of the Soviet Union. Healthcare there is quite a bit less than desirable, okay? So if you think that there's this great up and running system that's similar to Soviet times, that's not true. And I can only imagine what it's like now in COVID. Very difficult, I'm sure. Fetal alcoholism rate, 8 times the world average. That may have gone down in the past few years, but probably not too much. One thing I always tell the story, I was a little bit shocked about coming into Russia for the first time. I mentioned I had an ear infection, and I have for years my ears seem to be prone to ear infections. So one thing I do is what I see swimmers do. Whenever I get water near my ears, I pour alcohol in each ear, and that seems to stave off infections. It's kind of a swimmer's trick, I guess. So when I land anywhere abroad that I'm going to stay, including Russia, one of the first things I do is make sure I go to a pharmacy or a grocery store and get some alcohol for my ears. I found out you can't buy it anywhere there. And I was shocked, like, wait a minute. Even the ear doctor I went to, when I asked her for a prescription for alcohol, she said, I'll give you a prescription, but I'm not sure anybody's going to sell it to you. The problem being that people have been drinking it. So it's not something you can buy in a pharmacy or a grocery store, just rubbing alcohol. And I don't know that that's changed in the past couple of years. So because of the high alcoholism factor, and that's a huge public health factor, but they're dealing with it in what ways they can. But that's what it was funny to me. Here I go to an ear doctor, and she said, well, I'll prescribe it for you, but I'm not sure you're going to be able to get it even with a prescription. So that's severe. My first few days in Moscow back in 2010 or 2011, I guess it was 2011, I remember, and this has improved quite a bit. But I remember being shocked at seeing people just walking around on the street with bottles of alcohol as if they were Pepsis or Cokes. It was just so common. And I remember just being kind of shocked about that. No pretense. A few people might put a bag around something, a can of beer or something, but usually not. It was just an open kind of thing. And I taught out in a city couple of 100 miles east of Moscow called Murom. It's a little city that was, I taught there for a semester, taught law to undergraduates. And I remember sadly seeing, and we see this in our own country too, I'm not saying it's not here, but I remember seeing in the dread of winter, it was much colder out there in the winter, several situations where I would see someone lying in the snow totally drunk and wondering if that person was going to freeze to death because it was very cold out there, but it was more common than we might imagine. Of course, I've seen the homeless in Austin too. It was kind of shocking to me to drive through Austin and see some of the sights I've seen. But coming from rarefied Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where I didn't see so much of that. But anyway, in Russia, it seemed to me quite open to see people drinking a lot and often just lying around drunk. So the other thing I noticed that was shocking to me was stray animals everywhere. A lot in Moscow. One of the first things I noticed, and I noticed this out in Murom too, was homeless dogs, sometimes in packs and things like that. And I was told by Russians that animals, particularly dogs and cats, were so numerous because a lot of Russians don't believe in neutering and spaying. They have philosophical, I guess, Russian Orthodox teachings against that. So animals breed more prolifically than we allow them to here. Thus, you have lots of strays. I know every apartment I stayed in Moscow, I could look down and see people outside feeding little kittens and puppies who were homeless, but people in the apartments would put out bowls of food and milk for stray animals. Anyway, back to, I think I went back to the same, hold on, trying to, I don't know. Something happened here. I'm not moving. My slides aren't moving. Help. Oh, okay. Fetal alcoholism. Criminals, either directly or indirectly, control 40% of private business. I have no reason to think that that's decreased. Might have increased. Okay. The fact that you're recording this will. I have not had one of these sessions recorded before, but I won't try to guess what some of the facts are that I have here. 60% of state-owned companies and 80% of Russian banks. That's relating to criminality. And there's a view that democracy equals corruption and crime because after the Soviet Union fell, that's generally what happened. Again, I don't know how much any of you have read about what goes on there and what's happened since the fall of the Soviet Union, but there have been some very difficult times. In other words, democracy did not turn out to be what Russians had hoped that it would be. And I don't see that changing for the better anytime soon. I heard a lot of the people I taught with and people associated with Friends House Moscow, they use the term civil society. That's a really common term that people use there to think about democratization and de-Sovietization, is having civil society. Some of my co-teaching friends out in the burbs in particular use this term civil society sometimes almost in quotes and sarcastically, okay? Because again, things have not turned out as hopefully as some people have wanted. I'll go to the next one because this slide's never made a lot of sense to me. This is just a vision of some work being done. Get to what Friends House Moscow focuses on. I was trying to give you some of that information to create a framework of what you see there and of what Friends House Moscow is dealing with. A lot of what Friends House Moscow deals with are child-oriented projects, whether it's orphans, and there are many, many orphans in Russia, or children of immigrants. You have to remember when the Soviet Union fell apart, all those republics on the outlying areas, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, all these different, Turkestan, Dagestan, a lot of them, too numerous to recall, they all became individual countries. Okay, it's sort of like if the US fell apart right now, sometimes we think it is, if every state just became an individual country all of a sudden, there would be utter chaos. Well, this happened with the fall of the Soviet Union, but unlike the United States, the different republics had no experience with self-governance or democracy in any form. It was all very centrally organized. There are a lot of good books that have been written. I've read a couple of them. They're really excellent about what happened to the different republics after the fall of the Soviet Union. They went in as many different directions as possible. So a lot of the projects Friends House Moscow is engaged in have to do with immigrants and the children of immigrants. When I say this, I say, for example, I had a student who was from Tajikistan. And as he explained to me, Karen, he said, Tajikistan are Tajiks. He said, in Moscow, he said, I as a Tajik am looked at like African Americans in your country. Tajiks are the lowest of the low. And this can apply to others, but I think the Tajiks in particular. I taught a class at University of Delaware for a special project for about 3 months just a few years ago. Total class of about a dozen Tajik lawyers, teaching them American and British law. And they taught me a lot about what had happened to them. So a lot of these children are here as children of people such as the Tajiks. And as my friend informed me, he said, when you see someone out sweeping the streets with brooms, by the way, not high tech, out sweeping with old-fashioned brooms, he said many of those street sweepers are Tajiks. Many here illegally in some form, paid nothing, almost slave labor in many instances. Most of the taxi drivers, which are sort of like the Russian equivalent of Uber, are contract workers. I think most of the taxi drivers I had were Uzbeks. Some of them come from their own countries for certain periods of the year to make money and then go back. Well, in the meantime, they have children and families. And a lot of the children suffer from language difficulties, just poverty, extreme poverty. Friends House Moscow helps step in by funding projects for them, whether it's teaching them English, helping them in some other way, helping them procure just basic living necessities. But there's this vast kind of underworld of migrants from the outlying Soviet republics that fill up Moscow. When you think of what a huge city Moscow is, many of them, I can't give you a percentage, but many of them are from the outlying Tajik, Uzbek, and many other republics. And their children have a lot of difficulties to face. Medical care, another thing. So it's a problem that it's certainly in many ways more serious than what our own people face here, perhaps as in cities or rural areas, but it's a massive, massive group of problems within Moscow and other parts of Russia as well, but a lot of it gets focused right on Moscow. So these are just some of the children who are in the program. When I mentioned my son teaching, or he was at Friends House Moscow doing an internship, his primary focus was at a project that Friends House Moscow has helped fund for many years called Big Change. Big Change has a wonderful facility. It's just a fabulous project where they do a couple of things. His job as an intern was helping teach English to orphans. However, they also teach English to migrant children as well. Not English, I'm sorry, Russian. He taught English because English is always something that can help you go far in the world, wherever you are, even in Russia. Less so in Russia than in Europe. In Russia, I find a lot of people, the ticket to success might be speaking German, for example. They're more EU oriented, but English is still prevalent and language of business and law internationally. So, but his job primarily is in the internship program was teaching orphans. Now the orphans, not totally, but you may have heard the term about Russian orphans. It's a complicated picture, but there are two kinds of orphans in Russia, and there are thousands and thousands of them. There are social orphans, who are people either abandoned by their family, but they do have family, usually abandoned for economic reasons. The single mother who can't afford to support the child. The family who maybe didn't want children, but they're put into orphanages. These are the legal orphans. Then there are the social orphans, or I'm sorry, I get the terms confused, but those are social orphans. The legal orphans are the ones who do not have parents. Okay, parents have died from one thing or another. That's why I was giving you those stats to begin with on alcoholism, TB. I didn't even talk about HIV, and now COVID, of course, casts a whole new light on this. But all these diseases are leaving orphans by the thousands, whether social or legal, meaning whether they have no parents and family, or they have them, but they're not under their care. They're under the care of the state. And I could ride on a tram in Moscow, and often you could peer into windows, which you tend to do when you're riding on the tram, of these big buildings. And sometimes there were particular places I would go by where I could see through an upper story window bunk beds, and the bunk beds with young people. And usually curtains were closed, but I remember specifically seeing some of those. They're the orphanages that are scattered throughout. They're not just one big place here and there, but they're throughout in city buildings. And there have been a lot of problems with orphans. One of the things when they were closing down the hospitals, as I recall, they were also closing down a lot of the in-orphanage education. Meaning really with very little notice. I mean, with a few days notice, some orphans all of a sudden of different ages were finding themselves having to get on subways and trams and buses to get to public schools because they no longer had the education they needed within the orphanages, such that it was. It's probably not ideal in every situation. So there's this thousands of orphans with these problems. And a few years ago, it was about the time, not long after I started going over to Russia, that because of a long story I won't get into, a long political story, that Russia closed down American adoption of orphans too, which had been a hope for a lot of orphans. That got closed down totally and has been closed down now for several years. So there are, within the Russian middle class, as I understand it, more people have started adopting some of them, but some are just not adoptable. Once you get to a certain age and nobody wants you, you spend your life in the orphanage. So again, what I remember my son was doing with Big Change, which is a big focus for Friends House Moscow, was teaching some of the older orphans, the teenagers who were either getting out of the orphanages or had gotten out. I think most of his students had already gotten out, and they have subsidized housing for a period, I think it's like 5 years. I think then they're sort of on their own, but they need to learn work skills. They need to learn a lot of things. So let's say an orphan wants to go to work in a Moscow hotel, an international hotel, doing probably the bottom of the work chain, but they might need to know how to speak English to customers coming in and out. There are ways that English can help you to get involved in something more than what you might have been involved in. So that's what a lot of Big Change does. Okay, let me get back. Okay, here's another picture. I don't know what these specific children were, whether they were orphans or in another program, but we just have a lot of pictures of children. This is something that was going on a few years ago. I'm not sure it's true now. It probably is, but I don't want to get too, I don't want to comment on politics at all in these presentations. Friends House Moscow is not involved in politics and not involved in proselytizing. Now, some of you may have been aware, I think it was the year before last, not too long ago, sometime within the past year and a half, I think it was, that Jehovah's Witnesses have been completely banned from Russia. Okay, they were there. And I didn't meet any Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia, but I did meet some Mormons. Mormons are very active in Russia too. Somehow they have not been banned, but I think the Jehovah's Witnesses have more of defiance against the state, voice defiance against the state. And although Mormons proselytize a lot, I don't think they have the same kind of political defiance that the Jehovah's Witnesses made the mistake of having in Russia. And in fact, recently, some Jehovah's Witnesses, it doesn't mean they all went away, There are certainly Jehovah's Witnesses still there. And recently, several have been imprisoned for saying, okay, you ban us, but we're still here and we're still going to talk about what we want to talk about. And the government says, fine, you'll do that in prison. So that's what's going on with that. Quakers, on the other hand, Quakers, it's funny because I once said in a board meeting, I remember, it's good we don't proselytize. And one of my fellow board members, the Northwest U.S. Quakers are a little more evangelical than some of us. And he said, I want to correct you on that. Generally, no, we don't proselytize in Russia or anywhere else. But we also don't engage in outward defiance of governmental policies and that sort of thing either. We are there to serve the Russian people, period. And that's why I'm showing some of these things. The projects we're involved in, they do not get us involved in political activities at all. So this is a woman doing some sewing, I'm not sure. And these are different people doing different jobs. We participated in a lot of projects that involve technical training and getting people involved in cottage industries and things like that. This is a big project, Alternatives to Military Service. Alternativschick is the word. I have some other slides about that. We've been involved with this program for a number of years, and the primary focus, it's not on proselytizing people to become peace activists and trying to get people to reject the Russian military, which is mandatory, by the way, for all young men. You have to be in the Russian military. Although there are always people with connections who manage to keep out, but by and large, it is, and it's from, what I say here, I don't think anybody would object to my saying, is that it's a brutal experience, not just to go away and fight somewhere, but within the military. It can be a very brutal experience with your fellow military people. So it's a terrifying thing for most young men. And however, Russia has laws allowing alternative service. So what we help with this project, which is out of Kazan, another part of the country, we do get involved in other parts of the country. It's not just Moscow. Is this Alternativschick project. They were publishing a newspaper in hard copy and scattering it around. I think they've converted most of communications to online within the past few months, but it's really telling young men what their rights are with regard to alternative service, and then helping them find ways of alternative service. And that primarily ends up being things like working in hospitals, working in doctor's offices, in healthcare. It could be other areas, but it seems like most of the alternative service is working in healthcare. My guess right now, without knowing, is that there are probably a lot of young men doing alternative service in the COVID pandemic. Okay, that will be a report down the line. We're not getting that information, but that would be my guess. Because a lot of the young men we have helped most of them have done healthcare alternative service work. And we play a really significant role in helping this project get the word out that, number one, there are alternatives. You don't have to go in the military if you meet certain belief requirements. And it's not to be a Quaker, it's to have certain beliefs, period, but not necessarily be a Quaker. Because there are very few Quakers in Russia, but we try to give them the fact, here's what you have to do, the procedure you have to follow if you feel that you must do alternative service, and here are ways to do that alternative service. Okay. Oops, I'm going backwards. That's a copy of the newsletter distributed through churches. I think they do things like put it at laundries and any place where people might gather, trying to get the word out to young men. And it's been a really effective program. Like I said, it's mostly online now. We have run a lot of AVP programs. Any of you trained in AVP or not? Have any of you trained? Yeah, I've trained in it a couple of times. It's a wonderful training program for alternatives to violence. And Friends House Moscow has trained refugees, Native Russians, lots of different people from different walks of life in different places. In Ukraine, notably, after the difficulties in Ukraine starting in 2014. By the way, I was in Moscow when the Ukrainian uprising occurred. It was a kind of, short of being in Moscow in 1917, it was one of the most exciting periods to be there. I was there one day when in my school, I had a fellow professor who ran to the bank thinking the banks were going to fall. It was a big deal, okay, what was going on in Ukraine. At any rate, Friends House Moscow has long sponsored an Alternatives to Violence project, training people in AVP practices and principles. We've had in Odessa, which is also in Ukraine, and in Moscow and some other locales. We've had several projects. They might vary from year to year, but they've been pretty stable in Moscow and Ukraine. It's a big project, though, and these are just photos of some of the people involved. AVP in Ukraine, for example. Disabled children is another, and I noticed the time, it's 10:42. I'm cognizant of the time, and James or someone will put up a hand or something and tell me to shut up. Actually, after I speak about disabled children, let's have what minutes we have left for any questions. The other thing I noticed when I first got to Moscow, back in 2011, I guess it was, and I noticed it on all my subsequent times. And remember, every time I've been there for a period of about 3 months, okay, which have accumulated over a period of time into about a year and a half. Most of it in Moscow, but some out in Murom and another satellite, a suburb of Moscow called Podolsk. I noticed all of a sudden you don't see disabled people here anywhere. You don't see wheelchairs. You don't see people with crutches. You don't see children who have possibly learning, visible learning disabilities, things like that. They're just nowhere to be seen. Well, the problem was a lot of people certainly are there who have disabilities, but there were no accommodations. Like we had the Disabilities Accommodation Act back in the 70s. And they may have, I think they passed a similar act in very recent years, but the public accommodations just weren't there. And I'll tell it to you, as an able-bodied person, most of the time, like navigating public transportation, the metro, for example, you have these huge escalators going deep into the bowels of the earth, but they break down sometimes. And sometimes you have to do trams. And there's no way to get around if you're in a wheelchair or have any kind of mobility disability, and go into a restaurant, for example, and the restrooms are down in the basement. There's no way to get there without walking. So there's a lot there to discourage people from disabilities from ever leaving their home or institution, wherever they happen to be. So children in particular become very invisible and isolated, and Friends House Moscow has sponsored some projects to help alleviate that isolation and inability to navigate public life. Starting to improve, but they're massive. I noticed, for example, in Moscow, in some places right down in Center City around the Kremlin, there might be curb cuts. But then you go away a little bit, and there are no curb cuts. It's very difficult to get around. I also managed to injure myself a couple of times. I've had some very bad falls on the ice in Russia where I was hobbling around in great pain, but I still hobbled around. I was able to hobble, although I had some broken bones I wasn't even aware of. And I could not imagine having a disability and having to navigate to get around anywhere. So the point is you don't, okay? You can't get anywhere. And again, this is improving, but it's light years behind. And the sad thing I've noticed here in our past 4 years in this country, without getting too political, is that so many of the things we take for granted, such as things for disabilities, education, different kinds of things, so many things that we take for granted here that many of them we've lost over the past 4 years. But when you go to a country where they're just building it, you see how hard it is to get it in place in the first place. All the different things we take for granted, the accommodations in everyday life, and the disabilities accommodations are just an example. When a government stops funding, stops caring about people in different situations, it's hard to get that back because it was hard to build up in the first place. So yeah, I told James I have a group of 20-minute slides and I have a 45-minute group of slides that I've never used. And I've never gotten through the 20-minute slides because there's so much information I want to impart. Plus, I hope we have a minute or two for any questions, and I'll shut up. By the way, this is my costume today. It's a Russian scarf. And Russian scarves are not just decorative, they are very warm. People wear them to actually keep warm. So I have my Russian scarf on today.
I was wondering, maybe for these last few minutes of questions, we've got about 5 minutes left, if you want to turn off the screen sharing so we can all see each other again.
Yeah. Your screen, oh, stop share. Okay, good. Now I know how to do all this. By the way, the reason I'm in Russia is my son, the one I was talking about who was over there those years ago, he ended up going to the University of North Carolina, getting a PhD, and he's now teaching at Texas State. So that's where his journey, and a lot of that journey started back at Westtown School, that 3-week senior trip, and then from Friends House Moscow internship. So.
I have a question. This is Renee.
Yeah.
So as an African American in this country, I found that many of my fellow Americans are just completely unaware of what we have gone through in this country. And I was wondering, just talking to the rank and file Russian, how much do they know about these people that you were talking about this morning? Are they really aware of how people are suffering in Russia?
Well, Renee, I'm glad I didn't see a picture of you. Let me say one thing first. My son is biracial, half African American. He's one of probably under one hand in the whole world who's an expert on Russia. So he brings a totally different insight. And so that's where he's a little bit unique in his own studies. And secondly, though, their awareness too of what's going on over here really varies. My baby boomer co-professor friends out of Murom, for example, first time I had lunch with a group, I said, well, I asked them some questions, whatever. And one of them said, you know who our big role model, our favorite American is? And I said, who? I don't know. What do I expect? Angela Davis. Now, you have to remember that Angela Davis, who's one of my, somebody of my generation, was very much active in a lot of things, leftist kinds of things. I don't remember whether she called herself a communist or not, but a lot of people would have put her in that group, whatever. But that's why she and other Black activists are very much well known in Russia, because they were used as propaganda tools back in the Soviet Union. That's what I said, age makes a difference. Someone who lived through Soviet times has a very different awareness of the African American experience than perhaps younger people. Younger people are more exposed to arts and things going on. My guess is that on Russia, and you have to say something else too, Renee, is that even though communism fell and protests in this country, not just African Americans, but peace activism generally, all that kind of thing, were blown up by the Soviet government. Look at that nasty US and how awful they are and da 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 da. Well, a similar kind of propaganda goes on now. So let's say George Floyd protests. I don't know right now. I haven't been over there recently to know how that kind of thing is reported or understood in Russia, but you better guess that the government is using it for propaganda purposes. So there's a lot of that. So people are exposed. So when you ask the question, what do they understand? I think that's what you're asking me. It depends on where they're getting the information.
Okay, I wasn't actually referring to that at all. I was referring to how much do they know about the orphans who are suffering? How much do they know about the disabled Russians who are suffering? I wasn't so much referring to
Okay.
what they know about the Black experience. And I'm sure there are Black people in Russia too that aren't, well, I won't comment on that, but I was really referring to how much the rank and file know about their fellow white suffering Russians.
I think very much aware, and I'm sorry I misunderstood you. It was probably my head was going in that direction because I was so surprised about Angela Davis and things like that. But I think they're very much aware, okay? But there's also this, I don't know that most people feel a sense of power to change things, although the growing middle class, of course, is insisting on more awareness about things like the environment and the children and that kind of thing and medical problems. But it's, people are certainly aware and know what's going on. I had a student out in Murom, for example, she was in a social work program, and a lot of her work was going to be with orphans out in that city. So they know very much. Yeah, it's not like something that's hidden, and we're not looking back at Soviet days where everything was shoved under the rug like that. There's a lot that people don't know about, but I think they know generally about social problems like that. Does that answer your question better?
Yeah, it does. And the fact that you said they don't feel like they have the power, and it could be, I don't know, but I guess it could be dangerous because part of the deal in this country, at least last year, is a lot of the European population of this country decided to finally stand up next to the African Americans. And I'm not sure, I just have no idea what it would be like for people to stand up next to those orphans and those disabled, and you know how it could be dangerous for them to do that.
Well, for number one, organizations like Friends House Moscow, which are few and far between, are doing a lot of the hard lifting when it comes to improvement of situations. But when you ask about standing up, you don't stand up for a lot, okay?
Right, that's what I thought.
Yeah. I'm trying to choose my words carefully, but there are a lot of causes that people might stand up for, against, whatever, try to improve, but it's difficult to stand up for things when our free speech rights are not the same, okay? So yes, there are many people, like when I taught in the college out in Murom, a lot of my students were social work students who were going to graduate and go into the systems working with people with problems, whether it's alcoholism, orphanages, refugees, all these problems become intertwined. So there's certainly awareness in terms of a lot of people Russians are such good-hearted, wonderful people. They do want to help everyone and each other.
So sorry, Karen. We should probably just, if people do need a little break now, it's 10:53, so we've got a few minutes before meeting for worship. But feel free to stay on at least until 11, when we probably should start silence if you want to continue to talk and people can continue to listen. But
I'm watching the clock.
Thank you so much though, Karen. And so, yeah, feel free to keep going.
James, could I say something? I'm really excited because today we have a visitor from Baltimore. He's my pastor from my church in Baltimore. His name is Elder C.W. Harris. And really happy to welcome him to the forum, and also going to stay for the service, I believe.
Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you. I'd just like to say that Melissa is the founder of the organization in my background. And all the wonderful art that you see in the background is attributed to her service here in our community. And I must say, unlike the experience that you received in the United States, Miss Porter, I see a lot of people in wheelchairs in Sandtown through violence. I see a lot of people in wheelchairs and learning disabilities because they can't afford higher learning, and they cannot afford health care. So that's in my community. And I'm here in this community because, you know, I desire to be here and to stand and work with those who well, like so many people are suffering. So I thank my Quaker friends for supporting us down through the years, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate, and I do miss Melissa Ruoff. She's been a wonderful asset to our community. God bless you.
I just wanted to, I'm having a little trouble with my main computer here. And since I'm the host of the meeting, I'm not sure what happens when I restart my Zoom session. So if you all somehow get bumped off, just go back to the online page and join again, please. Okay?
And Terry, maybe could you maybe stop recording?
Yeah, I will. I can't do it from this machine. I'm using my Kindle to talk to you. I got to restart my other machine here. So, well, don't worry, I'll fix it up. Okay. Bye-bye.
This must get